So this is a dangerous drug.
Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the KLKN Channel 8 podcast that we call Uniquely Nebraska. Great to have you with us. Today, we're going to talk about law enforcement and the way it's perceived by the public. It is a hot topic, has been now for a while. No doubt, the relationship between the two is strained. And joining me now is Tom Casady, who spent 45 years in local law enforcement, from the sheriff's office, police department. He became the chief. You spent a great deal of time, Tom, studying police practice, how they handle alleged lawbreakers, the tactics that are used in apprehending, as well as human behavior. I know you get into that psychology part of it. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure.
Would you agree, maybe since the late 60s, have police community relations, have they been as volatile as back then? Is it worse now?
Actually, I think they have been just as bad, at least one time during my career, and that was about the time I got hired. I started as a police officer in 1974, and in the early 1970s, late 1960s, there was an incredible amount of tension. Police officers were really under a lot of fire and criticism. This was the era of the Vietnam War protests and the urban race riots that we had in the United States during the late 1960s. And there was a lot of tension. I think this is very similar to that period.
A lot was going on then, a lot going on now. Let's face it, there are a lot of people who support the men and women in blue. No doubt about that. But the recent shootings and deaths, primarily of black men, that has created a resentment of police in many areas across the country. In a moment, I want to talk to you about trying to actually fix the problem. But first, I know you're very open with your insight. I want your opinions on some of the recent cases and try and help us understand some of this. Obviously, the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin case, we all know the story. We all know the jury verdict. Guilty, second-degree manslaughter, second-degree murder, third-degree murder. I'm sure, like much of the country, when you saw what happened to George Floyd, you were devastated at what happened outside that store there in Minneapolis, how they arrested him, and also what the fellow officers did or did not do while this was happening. Your thoughts on all that?
Well, I thought at the time, and think today, that it was one of the most obvious cases of a murder committed by a police officer that I've ever been aware of. And frankly, every police officer that I've spoken to about it felt the same way, that it was clearly a criminal homicide from the get-go. In fact, lots of police chiefs and police officers were tweeting and commenting about that a year ago, right after it happened. So I think it was really obvious. The thing that disturbed me the most about it is that there were 3 other officers there, and that they didn't do anything to effectively intervene in what was going on. And that really disturbed me. I realized one of them was a rookie. I think it was his first day on the job or second day on the job.
I was going to say, is a deal with hierarchy. You know, you don't want to overstep your bounds. Chauvin is a veteran within the department.
A veteran, and it was his case and his arrest. And something's wrong with the culture when officers won't intervene to stop something that is so clearly illegal and dangerous. And if there's one takeaway from the death of George Floyd that I have, it's that police chiefs and trainers and command staff and first-line supervisors like sergeants have got to do more to break that down, so that officers everywhere feel an obligation to intervene when one of their coworkers has lost it.
When you see something, say something. One of those.
Do
right?
something. Don't just say something.
Right.
Do something.
I like that. Coming off that, let's talk about what happened after George Floyd's death last summer with the protests. They were held all across the country and other parts of the world, many of them peaceful, and rightfully so. Lincoln police shut down O Street, and protesters marched down O Street all the way to 48th. It was quite the sight to see. But some of it did get out of hand, and there was some rioting that did take place in downtown Lincoln. Your expertise on how, I know you studied this, how that developed into getting totally out of control in those certain areas, and how it was handled by our local law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, two different phenomena I think occurred. First of all, you had a group phenomenon where people in groups will do things that they would never do individually. You can see this at a football game. Ordinary people will behave in incredibly bad ways that they would never do were it not for the mentality of the group. I saw some of that. The other thing I saw is people that were just looking for a reason to commit arson, to break windows, to throw things at the cops, that had no stake in the actual topic of the protest at all. They were just basically taking advantage of the situation to commit their own violence.
We can't hit all of them, but I do want to get your opinion on some of the more, cases that have hit the media pretty hard here recently, other than the George Floyd. Daunte Wright, Minneapolis suburb there, wanted for an outstanding warrant. Police officer accidentally shot him with a gun versus her taser. Officer is charged with second-degree manslaughter. A lot of people want to know, how does that happen?
Well, it happens in the heat of the moment, in the fog of war. Basically, is how soldiers might describe it. The man is wanted for a warrant that I would consider pretty serious. It was for illegal possession of a firearm and fleeing to avoid arrest. When they learned that, they tried to take him into custody, and he resisted arrest and tried to get back into his car and leave. So they're struggling with him, trying to prevent that from happening. And one of the officers has drawn her firearm and shouts, "Taser, taser, taser," and discharges her taser. It's not her taser. It's her pistol. I can see how that could happen. It's tragic, and she'll pay the price for that, in my estimation, as she probably should. But if someone really thinks that she went out with the intent to murder a man and was quick enough on her feet to think up, I can cover my trail by shouting taser, 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 and then claiming that it was an accident, that's a bizarre line of reasoning to think that happened. It's an accident. I hope we can learn from it something productive that will help reduce the chance it happens, because this is not the first time that this has happened, and won't be the last unless we can figure out a way to do that. And I've got some thoughts of my own on how we might change things in a way that minimizes the chance of someone mistakenly having their pistol in their hand and thinking that it's a taser. My suspicion is that's what happened. She drew her gun. But in the heat of the moment, in the stress of the moment, she's thinking it's my taser in my hand.
Because a right-handed officer has the gun in the right side of their belt, taser on the left.
Correct.
And vice versa if they're left-handed. Yeah. And as you said, in the heat of the moment, confusion.
I doubt if she drew the wrong weapon. My guess is that she just lost track of which one she actually had in her hand.
Right. Let's move to Atlanta. Rayshard Brooks fell asleep in his car in a fast food drive-through lane, struggled with police, took a taser from them, and then ran. At one point turned, shot the taser in the officer's direction, continued running, and that's when Brooks was shot twice in the back. The officer involved faces felony murder. I'm sure you saw the video. What did you take away from that?
Lots of adrenaline, lots of stress. People who have never been in that situation of being in a violent confrontation with someone have no clue what it's like, that flood of adrenaline that can overwhelm your judgment, your ability to process time and distance, all of those other things. And sometimes I see these things and I think that's really tragic, that's really bad, that shouldn't have happened. Someone should be held accountable for that. But I wonder whether people realize how difficult this is and how challenging it is to maintain your wits and your thought process and your logic when you've got some guy that's resisting arrest and shooting at you with your own taser. And that's what I worry about, is that too few people understand that these things happen so fast and under such intense circumstances. And I think police officers watch these things, they cringe, but on the other hand, they can see how it happened. And my belief is that when these things happen, one of the things we really ought to focus about is how do we reduce the chance that it would happen again? Are there things we can do systemically that would reduce the chance that it happens? Like bad outcomes in medicine, for example, or like aircraft crashes, where the focus afterwards is not just on who's responsible and is there criminal liability here, but also on what are the circumstances, what can we learn from this, how can we change things to reduce the likelihood of a repeat.
Breonna Taylor, Louisville. She and her boyfriend sleeping Plainclothes police forced entry into their apartment looking for drugs. Her boyfriend shot, thinking they were intruders. They returned fire, killing her. No charges filed against the officers in her death. Is that right or wrong?
Hard to say. I mean, it's difficult for me to know all of the circumstances that happened there. Like everyone else, I know what I heard on the news, and I don't know the details of the interviews that were done with people, but the officers are in the wrong location, probably a good faith mistake. The boyfriend starts shooting.
Which he has a right to do.
They return fire. I don't know what's going through his mind. I don't know whether whether I can believe what he's said publicly, that he didn't know who it was. It's just impossible to know. But again, one of those tragedies that we ought to be looking at, and even without criminal charges, we ought to be thinking, what can be changed here to reduce the likelihood of this kind of a mistake being made? I've seen these things happen before. Serving high-risk search warrants at night, particularly no-knock warrants, is very dangerous.
For both parties.
Yes, and mistakes can be made in things like addresses or which apartment or which door serves which apartment. And we ought to be dissecting this case as thoroughly as we can to figure out, are there any takeaways here that we can use to help improve procedures or training so that the likelihood of something like this happening again is reduced.
You lead me right into my next area here. How do we make things better? Let's start with training. I know that there have been changes across the country in dealing with what has happened in the past and preventing it from happening in the future. Some of your specific examples that you would like to see changed in training these young men and women who get into law enforcement.
Rod, this is going to surprise you, but the year that I began my career in law enforcement, 1974, there were more police officers killed in the line of duty by a factor of 3 than there were last year. It's a much safer world for police officers, and it's not because there are fewer guns or fewer bad people out there or fewer police officers. It's because we've improved procedures and training dramatically during the past 45 years, so the likelihood of officers being killed in the line of duty is reduced. And that's where our focus should be. How do we use that same process to reduce the likelihood that citizens will be killed? Even citizens who are armed, or citizens who are criminals, or citizens who are resisting arrest. There are things that we can do that reduce the likelihood that incidents have a fatal outcome for both the officer and the person who's being pursued or arrested.
What about body cameras? I know we have some here in Lincoln. Past chiefs have said we would like to have more, but they're not cheap. How important are these body cams? Would you like to see more here in Lincoln? Because it can protect both the officer and the person on the other side and tell the entire story a lot of times.
Yeah, police officers here in Lincoln have been clamoring for body cameras. They want them, and my experience has been that in most departments that's the case, that officers are the number one proponents of body cameras. It's an expensive proposition, which is why Lincoln hasn't been able to do it all at once. But if memory serves me, they're in the process of phasing them into even more officers, and before long I think we'll have body cameras on all Lincoln officers. I think it's a good thing, although we've also seen some of the limitations of body cameras because the angle of view isn't quite that good when the camera's mounted on an officer's chest, for example, and his or her arms are extended. So it's not quite like having a drone that's flying overhead, but nonetheless, I think they're very helpful.
And not only are the body cameras, but as we saw in the George Floyd case, there's cameras everywhere. Everybody's got cell phones now, and it's so easy to take pictures, videotape, and in the court of law, there's nothing more important that can tell the story.
Actually, some of those third party or omniscient viewpoint cameras, surveillance cameras and bystanders with cell phones, actually capture a lot better video than body cameras do.
One of the examples we talked about was a foot chase earlier.
Yeah.
You have a viewpoint on foot chases.
I do. An awful lot of bad outcomes result at the end of a foot pursuit. Officer gets injured or killed, a citizen gets injured or killed. I think there are things that we could do to reduce the chances of bad outcomes at the end of a foot pursuit, just like we have with motor vehicle pursuits. And back when I was a patrol officer, it was pedal to the metal, and if someone rabbited on the police, you chased them until your engine blew.
Kind of a scene from Starsky and Hutch.
Yeah, not anymore. Now every department has policies that require officers to consider the importance of apprehending the person and judge that against the risk that the pursuit has caused.
So sometimes it's just not worth it, depending on what they're wanted for.
Yeah, and with foot pursuits, I think there are things that we could do. Some things have come along technologically with automobile pursuits, like spike strips. I think there are things that we can do with foot pursuits to reduce the chance of a one-on-one confrontation between a hyped-up offender and an exhausted police officer, both of whom have had an incredible dump of adrenaline and are not thinking straight. I'd like to think that the police officer is thinking a little bit straighter than the person that he or she's pursuing, but I've been in that situation before where I've caught the person. Now what do I do? That's something that police trainers and police managers, the good heads ought to be thinking about right now, is what can we do to reduce bad outcomes from pursuits? And I can think of a couple of things. First of all, we ought to discourage one-on-one foot pursuits. If you don't have backup there or reasonably close, it's really probably not a good idea to be chasing an armed suspect down an alleyway. Second, we need to start thinking about how we can use our technology to make the apprehension, instead of just our foot speed. Nobody outruns Motorola, Rod.
Right.
Maybe we can do things like set up perimeters more effectively, take our time in clearing an area. And it may mean that some people in a foot pursuit get away that get caught now, but on the other hand, we've probably significantly reduced the risk that a lone police officer, already pretty winded, catches up with an offender who happens to be armed and a deadly encounter ensues.
I think another way a lot of police departments have strengthened the bond between them and the public is getting out there into the public. And just my personal 2 cents, I think Lincoln does a pretty darn good job of that, especially pre-pandemic. That's one of the keys, right? Getting out of the cruiser, into the neighborhoods, talking to people, playing some basketball with the kids, different things like that.
Very important for police departments to engage in community policing, which means relating to your community, being part of the community, engaging with your citizens and your community associations and your non-governmental organizations so that officers are well known and generally respected. And I think when you see a department that gets into real trouble, it's because they've become so isolated from their community, and an us versus them mentality has formed that causes distrust on both sides. And I think that's what's happened in a few cities where some of these high-profile incidents have gone sideways.
I want to wrap this up with talking about the future. Some would say, who on earth would want to be a police officer right now? With the way they're perceived, let's not leave out that there have been ambushes on officers in some parts of the country over the past couple of years, obviously before that as well, but it seems to be more prominent, some of those fatal. Police departments, sheriff's offices, state patrols, a lot of them say they're having a hard time recruiting. How do we improve that, Tom?
We improve it by making sure that we are supporting the work that police officers do in the community, and that means if you're a pastor, if you're a grandparent, if you're an educator, you are encouraging young people to think about policing as a career choice. That's how it happens. It happens by people who encourage good young people to pursue a profession where you have an opportunity every single day to help your community and to help your fellow citizens. And the more we have people that are encouraging that for people that are young people that are maybe high school aged and college aged and thinking about what they're going to do for the rest of their life, the better. So we got to be very careful that we temper criticism and critique of the police with a firm understanding that this is a noble profession. We need really good people to do the job.
I'll tell you what, they do a job that a lot of other people would not want to do or even think about. You enjoying retirement?
Retirement's been great.
Do what you want when you want. Tom Casady, ladies and gentlemen, 45 years in local law enforcement. A pleasure. Thank you for stopping by and being part of our podcast and vlog. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Rod.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on Uniquely Nebraska.